Hello and welcome to the Talent Tide podcast presented by Job.com. This is the show that ensures you have the information you need to adapt and evolve your workplace culture as you ride the wave of change in talent management. I'm your host, Chris Nichols, and today we have a very special guest, the Chief Visionary Officer and co-founder of Job.com, Arran Stewart. This is going to be a two-part conversation, but today's episode is all about Job.com, the mission, and where it is going. Welcome, Arran Stewart, to the Talent Tide podcast. How are you?
I'm very well, Chris, and thanks for having me on here. So I've actually, to be fair, of all the podcasts and all the different things I've been on for, for all out my career, I've been most looking forward to and waiting in bated breath to be on Talent Tide, because I remember when we first, kind of did the deal with Endeavours, and I remember looking you up. I was like, he's got his own podcast. I was like, well, how long is it going to be until I get on there? And now, a mere 14 months after closing the deal and you becoming part of the family, I'm finally on the show.
Well,
so
look,
I'm honored.
Just like the pretty girl, you can't let them
Don't
know.
make it too easy.
You
Don't make it too easy. I get it.
I had to make you beg and ask a couple of times before I let you on.
I did.
You had good guests, Arran. So
there's
the level that you had to be at before you could come on, you had to work at a little bit. So, which is why we have two parts now. I'm giving you two parts. There's a very select few people that have ever gotten two podcast episodes. So this one I'm excited about because, like I said in the intro, we're going to be learning more about who Job.com is, which I think is really important. You've been on podcasts before talking about Job.com. You've had different conversations where, in my opinion, the opinion was what Job.com was or is might have been misconstrued. Oftentimes when we're out in the market at different conferences and things, we always get the thing of like, oh, you're a job board. And it's like, no, we're not. But let's have a conversation about that. And so I thought, you know what? We'll record a podcast and we'll just let everybody know. We can let them listen in this way. So before we get there, how about you introduce who Arran Stewart is? Because you got this funny accent. You now live in America, but obviously you haven't always. And I don't think everybody knows who you are. So why don't you share with everyone who Arran Stewart is?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I do have a funny accent.
Getting better now.
And I sometimes wonder... It is getting better. I got feedback actually from a friend of mine in the UK that was like, hey, you use a lot more American words now. You're starting to sound like you're changing. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then actually when I thought about it, it's true. So look, I'm Arran Stewart. I am from Luton, which is a town north of London, rather large town, 250,000 population. Grew up there, born and raised, 25 years I lived there. I've been in recruitment, rec tech for 15 years. I have been fortunate enough to have a very colourful career in the space. Originally started at S3. Shout out to the guys at S3. They actually owned a job board called the IT Job Board, which was kind of like my first true work gig in this space. I had other jobs. My very first job, I was in construction, laying curbs, and then I did car insurance sales for the Royal Bank of Scotland. I've done all sorts of stuff, but really in this industry, I started, and it was with S3 and the IT Job Board. I was very arrogant when I was young, and thought when I was working there, when I was working on the job board, that they'd given me a subdivision of the IT Job Board called IT Jobs in the City. And they were like having me go out there and kind of effectively take that job board to market just in the 2000s. And I was like taking note of all the money that they were making out of this website, which honestly at the time was very primitive. Like we wouldn't even tell our clients, we wouldn't even give access to database to our clients. We would just tell them we had this... It almost felt like a made-up number that they would tell us. 650,000 candidates in database. It's like, okay, is there? Where are they? Like, it was just made up. But they were making a fortune, like tens of millions. So I was like, I can do this myself. So I left and I set up. This was at a time where LinkedIn, in my opinion, was really getting a hype and all about networking and people being able to network with each other. And I came up with this brilliant harebrained idea that you could create. A job board that was for networking for blue collar workers and allow them to kind of almost refer each other into work and stuff like that. When you say it out loud now, it doesn't sound too stupid. And if anything, it might even sound a little bit like job case, if I'm honest. Just throwing it out there. But this was, 15 years ago. It failed miserably. I spent so much of my own cash on it, up to my eyeballs in debt. It was a real tough, horrible time. But off the back of it, we created a distribution product, which basically allowed you to multi-post your job onto lots of different platforms and sites. And it also included the media buying in it. And a friend of mine was like, he was a director at Michael Page at the time, and he was like, you should just productize that and take that to market. And thus was born iResourcer. And that was the business that then became part of Hamilton Bradshaw Ryder, the whole James Caan crew, all of that stuff. And that was the one that I would say kind of not put me on the map. That's not true, but it definitely was a major step towards changing my life, changing the direction, getting credibility, working with some incredibly talented humans that obviously existed in that organization. They set up a separate arm called Hamilton Bradshaw Ryder Technology. So Ryder stood for Recruitment Industry Development Agency. And I was just in charge of basically putting in deals and rolling up deals to do with, augmenting tech for recruitment and stuff. And so that was cool. And then in end of 2011, we set up My Job Matcher, which is what we know today as job.com. And I can't believe that we've been doing this for 11 years. And 5 years ago, I moved to the US and I'm married. I've got 5 beautiful kids. I've got a dog called Bernie, and I've got 2 tortoises as well that I'm currently looking at opposite me in my office. So, and that's me. That's Arran Stewart.
I love it. I think that's a good intro for you, because I'm not sure everybody understands like how long you've been at doing the job.com thing, right? And how you got here. So I want to get into that some, but also your background, right? Everybody knows you, honestly, in America as job.com, Arran Stewart. And so I think helping to paint the picture of like how you got to being job.com, Arran Stewart is really important for our market here. Who are you,
Who is this guy? Who is this weirdo? Who is this weirdo? So and I appreciate it, and I think it's great. America has been really kind to me in a sense of when we arrived here. It's very scary moving to a completely different country. Thankfully, culturally, it's not hugely different. There are some nuances between obviously London and Texas, of course, but in a sense of language and barriers and all that stuff, those things are overcome quite quickly. But America has been an amazing move for us as a business and my family. And I've been really lucky that so many industry professionals in the market have given the time of day to want to learn more about my story, the company's story, what we're trying to do. And in some respects, have been advocates to what we're trying to achieve. There's a lot of humans still in the market that still don't understand what we are, who we are, which is, part of today probably helps towards maybe clarifying some of that if they have the time to listen. Our job is just to continuously spread the message until the message becomes clear.
Absolutely. Well, they're going to have the time. Who's not going to want to listen to 2 bald guys?
Everyone's listening to the tide, bro. Exactly. Everyone's it's tidy at the tide. So it's.
So you talked about coming to America, but before that, job.com was around, right? Like, what is job.com? Can you kind of take us through how job.com came to be and its current iteration and what it is?
Well, and this is the bit where, for anyone that confuses us as a job board, of course, I completely understand how and why that would happen. Firstly, job.com was a job board here in the US from 2001. And at one point, during the 2000s, I believe that before the true rise of Indeed, it was possibly, with CareerBuilder and Monster, as one of the largest job boards in North America. I mean, I remember when we bought the business, we did the due diligence on the historical traffic. It was huge. I think 35 million unique visits a month, which kind of puts it not too far behind where ZipRecruiter is today. So yeah, it was massive. So anyone that did remember it or knew it back then with its original ownership, of course, but in 2017, job.com was a victim of what happened to the industry, right? The king is dead, long live the king, which was when Indeed killed Monster, basically. And then CareerBuilder didn't really progress either. And then you had the new incumbents, you had Indeed, and then you also had the heavily funded ZipRecruiter kind of take market share. And then was this kind of slightly historical left behind job board called job.com, which really had not progressed or kept up with what brings a candidate to a website, which is marketing and SEO. They had not invested or doubled down in that like the other competitors like Indeed and Zip. Indeed went down SEO. ZipRecruiter bought every piece of radio and TV they could possibly get their hands on, and that's how they built their empires. So when we acquired the business, it was in distress. It was a business that had gone backwards, but was sat on a whole heap of, like 55 million registered users, and also had, possibly the best URL known to man for our space. But we realized as a business ourselves, which had started as My Job Matcher, we were an aggregator in the UK. We would match people's resumes to an aggregated job population, and basically send them an email with the most relevant jobs for them every day. And it was very popular. It got millions and millions of people using it, every month. But again, the behavioral patterns of the job seeker were driving more and more towards ZipRecruiter and Indeed. And we could see the writing on the wall that unless you had huge amounts of money for marketing, you were kind of really not going to compete. And it paid homage. We paid homage really to my background being with Hamilton Bradshaw, which was obviously a big private equity group of recruitment and staffing agencies. And then my business partner, Paul Sloyne, had built and owned and sold multiple recruitment staffing agencies as well. We were like, okay, is there a way, when you look at the experience of how a recruitment and staffing agency works, right? And there's 20,000 of them in North America, and there's 227,827 recruitment consultants in North America. What's their process for how they deal with a human? And I got battered for this on the Chad and Cheese show. So if either of those two are listening right now, hopefully you'll give me a squeeze when I explain this and compare us to Uber, okay? But what did Uber do for the process of ordering a cab? It streamlined it. It removed so many of the clunky processes of how to order a cab, where to order a cab, deciding your destination, all of those different things, right? So our first iteration with job.com was to automate recruitment and staffing for a consumer-facing URL. Like Uber is a consumer-facing platform for traditionally for ordering a cab, and it streamlines so many of the clunky processes that do that. Job.com wanted to do the same. We wanted to create a process where you were immediately assigned to a recruitment consultant through a website URL, something you'd never see on Indeed, you'd never see on ZipRecruiter. You would go through more scrupulous matching, not generic, broad, what I would call curiosity matching, which is what Indeed and ZipRecruiter do, because they want to drive high levels of response. Their goal is for high levels of response. We want to be much more filtered and find the needle in the haystack, because we're making money when we do placements. We wanted to do the screener, and we also wanted to do scheduling within the ecosystem. So the experience of the job seeker was, I go all the way through to one, knowing which recruiter I'm dealing with, two, knowing if I was successful and actually matched the job or not, three, if I passed the screener questions, and if I did do that, four, I'm talking to Sarah, the recruiter, tomorrow at 10:30, an experience you just don't get on a normal job board. And that, akin like for an Uber, excuse me for using it, but it's just something that we can all resonate with, is streamlining processes to create a digital experience towards recruitment and staffing. Obviously, that's only the first guise and iteration of what we're doing. We have so much more planned within our roadmap and how we make that, exponentially better for the job seeker. But that's what we're doing. We needed a route to market. Well, the recruitment staffing industry is hugely competitive. And I think at first, I remember when we acquired Higher Virgins, everyone's like, why have they bought this small little recruitment agency in the middle of, Florida? And now it's obviously become more apparent why we're doing it. And it was, again, on the Chad Cheese podcast, they're forcing the recruiters to use it. And it's like, well, I wouldn't use necessarily such aggressive language as forcing. There's no one there with guns at people's heads, just machetes, so...
As far as I know, everybody wants to use it. From
Everybody does want to use it because they want to be part of a digital revolution.
Everyone wants to make their job easier, and that's really what the
Yeah.
technology that we've developed is about: is making the lives of recruiters easier every day to make placements
easier. Well, think how many of those processes, from job selection to advertising to database searching and matching to then matching and shortlisting, screening and scheduling, if all of that's done in a singular streamlined process through a domain URL like job.com, and it's being done 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I'm not having to do any of that as a recruiter. I'm just waiting for good candidates to land in my inbox to do, my calendar to tell me when I'm going to do a quick 15-minute call with them. That's pretty cool, right? But the user experience is exponentially better for the job seeker. And now I don't go into that black hole of like, I just applied for a job on, Indeed, and I don't know whether or not I'm going to speak to anyone, or I don't know whether or not they've even looked at my resume. I have no idea. I actually know that if my resume doesn't pass the match, that I'm not going any further. I know that if I answer the screener questions wrong on job.com, I'm not going any further. I know that I'm scheduled, if I did make it all the way through it, I'm going to repeat myself now, but I'm scheduled to talk to Sarah tomorrow. I know that I made it. That is an exponentially better user experience as a minimum viable product from job.com.
And I think where the comparison to Uber makes the most sense, right? And we're obviously honing in on that. But the reality is, and look, I never had to experience this because I'm a millennial, but I assume from movies that if you wanted a taxi, you had to stand out on the side of the road in New York and hope that one would stop by with your thumb out in there, right? Or maybe you could go to a dial-up phone and call them and say, hey, I need a taxi at this time or whatever. That's how it works. That's the same experience a candidate has when they go to a job board. They're putting their information in, they're holding their finger out, and they're hoping that somebody stops. But they may not. And okay, somebody stops. They have no idea what the experience is going to be like when they get in that car. They don't know who the driver is. They don't know if they're any good or not. And that's what the technology that we're developing at job.com does. It allows them to be able to see a recruiter profile, the same as you get an Uber profile. It allows you to see, in the future state, ratings of said recruiter, right? And be able to say...
Yes, that's right, which we work with great recruiters, by the way, plug.
And then they can see, oh, wait, the recruiter that I'm working with is actually an engineering recruiter. Like, they only do engineering recruiting. That's what I want to be as an engineer. So now I'm talking to somebody that understands my industry. And that is where I think the comparison to Uber makes the most sense, right? Is we're creating an experience that's great for the end user, but in the end, it actually creates a great experience for the recruiter as well.
Yeah. So I just want to point this out that you did a much better job of explaining this than I did. So I'm gonna actually hand the baton over to you, Chris, in the future. I'll be like, don't talk to Arran because he gets too fluffy on words because he's British and he'll try and throw. Chris is much better. You did a freaking brilliant job of explaining that. Then
what do you do?
And
as co-founder, hire people that are better at the things that than you are, right?
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be the smartest person in the room. I'm certainly not the smartest person on this podcast, so that's great. But I do want to double click in though, because I actually purposely listened to the Chad and Cheese podcast again the other day, where they kind of talked about our marketing, our positioning, the message to the market, and the reality is that they were right. They are right in what they said. And obviously, when they beat me up on the Uber thing, because I'd only done a rant on LinkedIn and not provided some context behind it, I was like, okay, well, obviously I'm not saying that we're the Uber for recruitment and staffing, but what I'm saying is how that process automated many components of ordering a cab. That's kind of where we've gone with the recruitment staffing side through a digital platform as a digital staffing platform. So, which again, it's new terminology, it's new language.
Confusing to everyone, right? Like that's the problem. Is that
we're
disrupting. Think of it as been around for so long, Aaron, that it is confusing. Like, what do you mean a digital staffing? Don't staffing companies use digital processes to find candidates? Sure, right, but
they do. But do they do it in a singular URL that represents their business and brand the whole way through? Do they provide complete transparency for who the client is the whole way through the application process? No, they don't. Like our candidates land and they'll know that they're going to Baylor Scott White, and that's just that's this is the difference. These are all the fundamental nuances and differences that you'll see. I mean, eventually we want to have full salary transparency the whole way through the hiring process too, because as we've seen the laws changing in New York State and New York itself, and I think there's 9 other geographies around the US now that are going through this transparency piece. We love transparency, right? That's what we want. I mean, we're sounding hugely promotional now, which is kind of what this is. And I just want it, for anyone that's interested, that does want to know, then of course, except there's going to be bias from me, because obviously I'm the founder, right? So of course I'm biased, but these are the nuances. These are the differences that we have a roadmap towards creating a vertically integrated hiring experience that takes you the full way through the journey of hiring to the point that you end up at the company. And in the end, when we redeploy you on assignment after assignment after assignment, because sometimes I think people forget, if they're not familiar, but like 78 million people moved work in the last 12 months. Roughly 66% of those movements are typically internal labour market movement, ILM, so people moving in an existing company. So 34% brand new hires. 16 million of that 34%, which is basically half, or more, are from staffing recruitment agencies. Staffing agencies are putting over half the brand new talent into work every year. So it would naturally feel like, why is there not an Uber-esque, Amazon-esque digital experience that is a destination URL that is just taking people from the point of application to the recruiter they're dealing with, to the client they're going to be hired by, and then forever redeploying them out in the market, akin to what recruitment staffing agencies currently do, but digitally, through a digital experience. I don't go to the store and wander around the store and look for what I want to buy, then go to the cashier and then put it there and then pay it. I just go to Amazon and I do it all digitally. It's the same thing. I browse, I look for what I'm looking for. I do it much quicker. It is the same process automation for what would normally be a bricks and mortar, absolutely, heavily clunky process.
Good news, Aaron. You mentioned that you thought we were selling too much. The Talent Tide podcast is presented by Job.com, so you can sell as much as you want to. You're paying for this time.
Job.com is a HR technology company dedicated to providing the best digital recruitment platform and talent solutions on the market. Our mission at Job is to remove the friction from the hiring process by delivering technology that creates more effective talent placement, better fit career moves, and a more human hiring process.
Well, I'm hoping, when we share this, that, people do listen if they're interested to learn more. And actually, just to give some kudos back to SIA, by the way. So, because I had a proper rant at them and moan. Firstly, John Nerton, who's at SIA, personally, who's actually a friend as well, he reached out to me with a huge email explaining, why there might be a misconception in the market, what we need to do it. And it was a really, really depth, thought out feedback to me. And it made me feel bad. It actually made me feel bad for my rant. So if SIA, if you listen to this, I'm sorry.
I guess we'll send the episode directly to the folks at SIA. We'll send it to Chad.
John is a really nice. They're all really nice, actually, at SIA. The reason why I bit and I was annoyed is because I know that their strategy behind having first content news to market for SEO and to be the beacon of knowledge in the industry and stuff like that, which they are, but they have worked with us and me for some time. And I was annoyed that the opening gambit was job board. I was like, that is not what we are. So mutually, I think we can all agree that they definitely realise we're not, and they do. But at the same time, maybe I shouldn't have been so brutal with my response, but it frustrated me because I want them to remain this beacon of knowledge in the industry. So they have to go above and beyond to make sure whatever information they release to the market is accurate. Okay, because they're not the consumer. They're not like, if a candidate called us a job board, if a person in HR called us a job board, if a hiring manager called us a job board, a recruitment consultant, I completely understand. But the voice of the industry, who's meant to be on the pulse of this stuff, like when they called Eightfold AI a chatbot, it was like, it was not cool. But I'm sorry, SIA, because you did write me a hugely long explanation, and I'm going to be with them at the CWS and the gig economy piece thing in Dallas. So I've got to see them face to face. and I don't
look,
want
we
to.
all have to hold each other accountable, right? So that's really what this is about, is as being accountability partners to each other. Let's keep this thing rolling, because we could talk on this all day. And this was my concern with bringing Arran Stewart on, is that he and I would talk throughout and not get anything accomplished. So
that's what we're made to do.
Yeah, we're probably going to start a daily thing here, so we can just get all of the things out that we want to say. So why'd you come to America?
Good question. Okay, well, let's talk about we can get into some truth as well, because it's always sunshine and rainbows and stuff like that, right? I came to America because we had reached a point with My Job Matcher, which that's what it was at the time, right? Where it was like, where does this business go? There'd been some fundamental changes with GDPR in the European Union. And there'd also been some fundamental changes with what was called Universal Job Match. So anyone in the UK that's in the industry will know exactly what I'm talking about. But basically, the government's website for reaching unemployed people in the United Kingdom told us that we could no longer use that to reach those users, because it was, I think, kind of classed as anti-competitive, which is just the UK all over. It's like, no, you can't reach people who are unemployed with jobs. That's anti-competitive. It's like, yeah, whoever made that up is a genius. So, but nonetheless, it made trading and growing in the UK, and already a small market, tiny market next to the US, just not as appealing. And you've got to look at, I would spend just as much time there trying to grow the vision of what we're doing as I will in the United States. But the US is just a bigger, more affluent, more adopting, more. It's just a better market. I've lived and breathed in both, and I can tell you this one is a better market. It just is. So that was the business case. The personal case, I wanted a new opportunity for my family and my children. Okay, I grew up in a really ghetto part of the United Kingdom. Actually, if you share the article, voted the worst place to live in the whole of the UK. So I can't remember the name of the article.
You don't have to. All you have to do is put in Luke.
It's just called the end. Oh, yeah, they called it the end of humanity, Luton Town. Yeah. That was the article, right? I grew up in that, and I grew up in the worst part. My wife and I both grew up in the worst part of it, right? We've known each other all of our lives, and we weren't living there then and after. But I just had like relationships and historical memories and just things of that nature to do with my life there, that I was just very comfortable closing a chapter on and saying, do you know what? I want to live the American dream, and I want to go to a place where I can nestle myself in a lovely little suburban bubble, which I have here in Lakeway in Austin, and I can raise my kids that way. And I'm delighted to tell you, everything I thought that would happen around that actually did. And we have a beautiful neighborhood. We have a beautiful home that we built. My kids are so happy at their school. My wife has met her lifelong best friend here now, who they're just like that, her and Jenny. I'm really happy I made that leap. The only thing that wasn't good, which was the most challenging thing of my life as we were trying to create this new world for ourselves, my new life, my family, was my eldest daughter is not my wife's. Okay, I had her in my ex-relationship, and at the time she did not live with me. I had her every weekend. We had gone through several, fairly lengthy court decisions and battles with her mother and I, which, by the way, her mother's a brilliant mother. We're great friends, but it's just sometimes when you're trying to go through those circumstances, disagreements can happen. Okay. But we'd gone through some fairly lengthy court battles. I'd managed to gain, have access with Caitlin again. And then a mere few months after that final battle, I had to then sit her down and bear in mind, we were so close, and tell her that I was going to move to America. And it was the hardest conversation I ever had to have in anything in my life. And, she asked me if she'd ever see me again, which obviously just broke me down in tears as her father. And, the first year I flew 132,000 miles flying back and forth to pick her up for school holidays and just to see her and stuff like that. It was really tough, but as it transpired, because of the beautiful American dream and the beautiful place that we live and the wonderful people that live here, my daughter also fell in love with what America had to offer. And she moved with us and came full in our custody in 2020. So, it all beautifully worked out in the end, and I'm so grateful to the universe for that happening. So yeah, that's why I moved to America. There's the challenges, but actually, thank God, it turned out really, really good for us. There's a saying in the UK, right? There used to be a TV show called Only Fools and Horses. And it would be a real Cockney guy talk like that, and he'd be like, "He who dares, Rodders, he who dares," right? And that's kind of what always goes in my mind. Anyone that knows the UK and knows Only Fools and Horses will know exactly what I'm talking about. Very well common thing in the UK, but he who dares, Rodders, he who dares. So, and definitely we dared, and it worked out good for us.
We will be putting the YouTube link in the podcast notes at the end of the show for that.
He who dares. So,
that might be my new hashtag. That might be job.com's new hashtag.
Well, we have to make sure it's inclusive.
We will.
So
we might just do who dares.
Whoever dares. Whoever dares.
I like that.
Yeah, whoever dares. Yeah, whoever dares.
We can make it our own. I'm on board with that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've covered, how job.com came to be. We've covered how you got to the greatest nation on earth. And
it's true. I agree with that.
So how do where's job.com going? What, obviously there are misconceptions about what it is today, but let's kind of wrap up here with where job.com goes from here. What is it?
Well, we managed to sort of first iteration process automate the first component of a recruitment consultant's desk and a job seeker's experience, which is a job goes out to market, candidate lands on the job, reads it, loves it, can see which recruiter is working on it and who they'd be assigned to. They apply, shortlist, match, screen, schedule. But then that bit's done. But then the bit that needs to be done after that is all of the feedback loop and creating a beautiful image and timeline for the candidate that says, this is where you are, you've been submitted to the client, this is their feedback, or this is when your interview is with the client, or you were successful or not successful, or the negotiation piece. And then if you get hired, then the piece after that, which is, hey, thanks, Arran, for being in your job for the last 6 months. You're coming to the end of your assignment. We found another great opportunity for you. You can go forward for this. Basically creating what I would call my career, excuse the terminology, but almost concierge, something that just stays with me, right? If I sign up to job.com, why would I ever not want to be on it? It puts me into great roles. It puts me in touch with a human faster than anywhere else. I always know where I am in the hiring process, and I can, consistently find myself new opportunities and know exactly who I'm going to work for, which recruiter I'm dealing with, and have transparency on my salary, all these extra things that just provide a much better experience end to end. That's the sort of nearest and dearest and, crudest of experiences that, we continue to build out and make better. We have a huge vision, which obviously, because I'm, I don't like to do things by halves, but I will, and I've talked about this in the past. I've been talking about this for 5 years, but it's around the standardization of information. We've got hundreds of recruiters at job.com that are validating humans and credentialing humans every day to get them into companies. And there are hundreds of thousands of recruiters doing this every day for 16 million people being placed into work every year by these staffing agencies. There is not a single source of truth behind someone's career history anywhere, okay, that's on a framework that we're all willing to adhere to, or what would be classed as a cooperative governance framework, okay? We have done an extensive amount of patents around this. I continue to do a huge amount of patents into the future for this, which is to create the single source of truth by citing someone's career history, an objective, quantitative based. Did Arran work at iResourcer? Yes or no? Did Arran get this degree? Yes or no? Did he get this grade? Yes or no? Information that could be forever crystallized. And, we're all about blockchain, right? I know we've had people be like, oh, it's blockchain because they're using a gimmick word. No, some of our patents are hugely extensive in the utilization of that technology. And why? We believe that a single source of truth behind someone's career history, there's only one other area in our lives that we're used to having a single source of truth, and that's in our credit score. We allow that to adhere, we adhere to that with everything from our car loans to our houses to our mortgages, etc. You think of this as a credit score for your career, and it's something that everyone in the industry would adhere to as a single source of truth behind you. It sounds hugely ambitious, but I feel that there are many players out there in the market, I think, that are also looking to do this, trying to do this. The piece where I think that we have a competitive advantage to doing it over others is that, one, we are a consumer-facing digital experience running high volumes of candidates through a process, which allow us to gain this single source of truth data over everyone else. And two, we are seriously patenting the life out of this. And I think we've, not to reveal the secret sauce, but I think we've probably got the jump on most people when it comes to doing this stuff. And that's, I want job.com to become the home of someone's career history. That's what I want it to be for them. If 16 million Americans are going through the route of recruitment and staffing, then that's a big enough populace of data that means we could become the home of where people manage their career history.
So Aaron, you talk about that, and I think most people initially say everybody's a little bit closer to their data than maybe they've ever been before in history, right? There's concern about who does what with data, but maybe how do you quell fears of humans that are worried about their data and what it means to have your data in a centralized place like we're talking about here?
Yeah, so and again, so let's make sure we use sort of terminology. So single source of truth on a decentralized server system, right, which is blockchain. So yeah, why would I do that? Well, we've all become pretty, credit score came out in 89. And I know most humans that are concerned about their lives, their careers, their financial health, they adhere to the framework of making sure that they have a great credit score because it allows them to live their lives the way that they want to. At the moment, most studies show that 78 to 85% of candidates lie in their resumes or in the hiring process. And that's gamification is causing issues when it comes to time it takes to validate someone, really if they were who they said they were when you place them into a company, retention. Some of that misinformation might be like, oh, I cycle 3 times a week. And it's like, no, you don't. That Peloton in your garage is a bloody clothes hanger, okay? And that's fine. Who cares? It doesn't really make any difference. But it might be, oh, I've been a senior developer at such and such, and actually you would know more than a junior, or something that's more significant. The fears for a person is, well, the people that really will not want it will be the ones that know that they're providing misinformation, okay? Because anybody that can see the writing on the wall that providing a validated profile for yourself to streamline your onboarding, your hiring. If I could tell you that average time to hire in the United States is roughly 42 days, and if you have this profile and skip all of this stuff that we have to do, you could be in that job 10 days earlier than normal. That's a game changer for people. That's a real game changer. And I think that's something that we want for candidates and clients, because as we become more and more digital in the future, attaining accountability on our achievements, on our accolades, our meritocracy is going to become more and more essential as we start to become more and more digitalized in our day-to-day lives. I know you, Chris, as a person personally. If I've never met you before and you're only digital, like most things are now becoming digital, it becomes really difficult to really know if I can trust you, if you are who you say you are, and stuff like that. So creating this digital accountability version of ourselves in the hiring process, I almost believe is just inevitable. It's inevitable.
Transparency is a good thing. And I think that, both companies and candidates probably initially will ask the question of like, why would I want this? And I think of it as this way. Look, we're becoming a much more transient workforce, right? Like people move around. So as a company, you want to have accurate, verified data on candidates because the likelihood that you're keeping them around for 25 or 30 years is probably not going to happen. Maybe less than 1% of your workforce right now will be there with you in 20 years, right? Like that's just the new age of hiring. Definitely. And on the candidate side, I think
unless they work at Fortis Healthcare, then everyone stays there forever. So Jeremy won't let them go. Yeah.
On the candidate side, it's about I think most candidates want a fair shot, right? And we see so much of the hiring process being referrals, right? Like, oh, I know this person, and that's their way of verifying that we should hire them. And what we're saying is, what if it's not about who you know, but it's about what you've done? And I think when we talk about the American dream and the American way, I think too often we get stuck in the idea of it's about working. I mean, we say that it's about working hard, but the reality is, unfortunately, a lot of times it's about who you know. And what we're trying to do is trying to help break down those barriers.
Oh, yeah.
We're trying to make it a more inclusive environment for everybody. We want it to be about what you've done, what your experiences have been. And I think that at the core is who, we realistically want to present ourselves to the market as.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with every word. And you actually touched on something there as well about removing the who you know, because who you know actually also has, diversity barriers, right? There are major diversity barriers on the who you know piece. So, does that young African-American guy know the Caucasian guys that work at Morgan Stanley?
Absolutely.
Not saying that Morgan Stanley's all like that, but finance is typical for that, right? And just getting people in based on their validated merits. And I think that's something. So that's really the future for what we're trying to do. That's something that we're investing heavily and hedged heavily against with our IP and patents and strategy. I'm kind of very much looking forward to seeing that someone's going to do it, right? Someone's going to do it. I believe that we will. I believe we will become that. I think we start really heavily marketing job.com to the consumer, which is sort of on the cards latter part of next year. We've stealthed our way to where we're at, sure. Right? A lot of people are like, what have they done? Who have they raised? Who have they got behind them? And we've kind of done that a little bit on purpose because there's some big competitors out there who are definitely thinking about what we're doing right now. And we know that they are because they release platforms to do it. And then they sunsetted them, like Indeed Hire. It's on the minds and lips of everyone. Look at Hired, look at Vettery, part of Adecco. People are thinking about what we're doing. I think paying kudos if they do listen. I think the other people in the industry who are very admirable, who are doing similar things to what we're doing, sort of, there is a difference. It's JobBot. I think those guys, that woman Heidi, who's the CEO there, she's like proper, she's like a culture queen. Yes. And they're doing, she's great, isn't she, man? I get excited looking at, I want to work at JobBot. I want to go there. I want to go on their trips. But nonetheless, it's good. They're a good company. But I think the market is going that way. I think more competitors are going to come into the market. But I believe that Job.com has what it takes to be the honchos.
It's got Arran and Chris.
It's got Arran and Chris. Which is always two bald guys. To be fair, we're missing the third bald guy on this call, Paul Snoin. Yep. So, and then, so we could be like the picture of the cone heads, in the front of that cover all together. This is what working at job.com does to you.
It takes away your hair and it gives you gray ones in your face. This is the perfect segue because we just started getting into recruitment technology. And I think this is a good place to wrap up part one. And part two, we can really get into what the future of recruiting is, how it's going to change, how we help modernize recruiting, right? So this is my little ticket for part two, come back and listen. But Arran, I'm really glad that we got to do this. Finally.
Yeah.
So
listen, you kept me waiting long enough that it felt meaningful. Good. I don't feel like an afterthought. I feel appropriate. And also as promotional as this has been, which hopefully people that have listened to it have also enjoyed learning a little bit more about us. I think, it's good. I've enjoyed being on the podcast. Thanks for having me on.
Glad you were here. And that's a wrap on another episode of the Talent Tide podcast. We'll see you soon. And remember, success is on the other side of fear. Talk to you soon.